welcome everyone. Really pleased to have you all here today. We have a nice event and a nice treat this afternoon that's a little different. So, I've introduced many different events here at the Ark, different individuals and events, but this is the first time I've had the pleasure of introducing resident authors and their work. So this is a real honor and something different. So when Joe Incognito, otherwise known as Joe Hipp, was self-publishing a book of short stories back in 2022, Kevin Scott approached me and asked if I would write a foreword for the book, which I did. And as the trio of editors, Kevin Scott, John Murphy, and Joe Hipp, were preparing to publish this book, Short Stories, Poems, and Secrets Beneath the Waterfall, I did provide a foreword, and I'm going to just do a brief reading from that now. And then, although you know the authors very well, I will also read a little bit about the editors as I conclude my remarks. So, as part of the foreword, it does read, my first day at the Army Residence Community in May of 2018 included attending an Eagle luncheon. At the beginning, the MC walked about the auditorium and introduced residents who had been previous luncheon speakers at the Eagle luncheons. One resident had explored the Highway of Death at the end of Operation Desert Storm. Another had spent World War II with his family in an internment camp for Japanese Americans in Arizona. Yet another resident had traveled to the South Pole. Two others had been foot soldiers in Europe during World War II, and yet another was an F-4 Phantom pilot during the Vietnam War. And I was very impressed and touched by these unique introductions of our residents and what they've done for our community and what they continue to do. So in a similar way, Stories and Secrets Beneath the Waterfall by Joe Hipp, John Murphy, and Eagle editor emeritus Kevin Scott, it introduces two readers who have lived some aspects of life in very full measure. And there's a quote attributed to Hemingway that really states, in order to write about life, you first have to have lived it. So part of my job is to guide the Ark, the Army Residence Community, as it continues to serve those who have lived the lives that would inspire such a Hemingway novel. There's another quote from Roots author Alex Haley, and his observation was, every time an older person dies, it's like a library burning down. Sometimes the residents are the main characters of a story. Other times they are the storyteller of a drama or even the narrator of history. So this library of memories can be large or small, with shelves of nonfiction or coffee table books with lavish illustrations. So my thanks to Kevin Scott, John Murphy, and Joe Hipp, and the other resident authors for creating this incredible collection of stories, poems, and secrets beneath the waterfall here at the Ark. And by doing so, reducing such a harsh finality of Alex Haley's final quote. So a little bit about our distinguished editors. Kevin Scott, John Murphy, and Joe Hipp met at the Army Residence Community, and they had very diverse military backgrounds. Kevin served 25 years in the U.S. Army, John served 28 years in the Marine Corps, and Joe spent 30 years in the Air Force. So although diverse, they shared a very common interest, writing about people they met, attempting to capture the quintessence of their subjects, and the stories are only vignettes of the total persona, as each person's life really could be a novel. So while putting this collection of short stories into final form, as we know, Kevin Scott passed away during that time. His loss affected many who lived here at the Ark. Kevin was an Army dependent, an Army brat, born in Japan, moved with his parents to exotic places throughout the world, including Heidelberg, Germany. He landed in South St. Cloud, Minnesota, where he met Barbara Scott now. Finished in high school, he enrolled in St. John's, and he did obtain a degree in English and a commission in the U.S. Army. So when he retired, he found a niche at the Ark as a communicator and writer, and as many of us know, he served over 8 years as the editor-in-chief of the Eagle, the Ark publication. At one of his Eagle Luncheon introductions, he said, God doesn't just reveal himself through magnificent wonders, but through the faithfulness of those who quietly listen to and share his words. So that was Kevin. John Murphy, as we said, served 28 years in the Marine Corps, including 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. He grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, a Midwesterner, graduated from Creighton University, and he also majored in English. Attended the Marine Corps Command and Staff College. He was selected and attended the National War College. He has a Master's of Arts degree from Ball State University, and his first novel, The Scarlet Shamrock, was published in 2013. Congratulations. Joe Hipp served 30 years in the U.S. Air Force. He included an extended tour in Vietnam. Joe grew up in Arkansas, Georgia, and Texas. He's a graduate of Texas A&M. Any Aggies in the house? Yeah. All right, there's one. Graduate of A&M. He majored in journalism, so we have 2 English majors and a journalism major. He wrote 3 historical nonfiction stories, followed years later by a small collection of short stories, and then a novel and a novella. So this is his first book in collaborating with other writers, and we all know Joe. Not only is he a very talented author, but he also gives so much back to the community and other residents through visitation, his patriotism, and his ongoing service to others. So at this time, ladies and gentlemen, I'll turn it over to Joe Hipp and our panel of authors and editors.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you, neighbors, for showing up. We are all neighbors here at the Art. We're just a big old neighborhood, and as the Bible tells us, we got to love our neighbors as ourselves. And I will confess, sometimes I don't love myself very much. Usually, when I say something I should not have said. I guess that's why I write stories, trying to say the right thing at the right time. And that is why we edit our stories, understanding that times change, people change. In all change, there's a constant, the truth. Even in the fiction we write, there's an element of truth. Quoting from Aldous Huxley, words can be like X-rays. If you use them properly, they'll go through anything. You read and you're pierced. That goes for you folks that read from the library, yeah. From us editors, may the words we write never slight those we write about. If Kevin Scott were still with us, he'd be doing the introduction. Those of us who remember him know that he had a golden throat, able to capture an audience. A reading is the author's chance to interest you in his story. Our book of short stories has a lot of authors. Couldn't get them all on the stage. Some are no longer with us. We've been collecting stories for over 5 years. It began with a small self-published book of short stories titled Stories in Sequence Beneath the Ark, and Kevin thought we should expand on it. Austin Macaulay, the publisher, has had a draft of the book, and this is what we sent him for 8 months. And we'll release the book in October. October the 10th is his publication date. A copy will be in the library as soon as we can get our hands on it. The final proof we received contained 9 chapters, 80 plus stories, and over 300 pages. After Susan Sabino read from her very personal life story, Life Between the Lines, John Murphy and I thought it would be a good idea to make a similar presentation. He would read from his novel, The Scarlet Shamrock, and I from stories, poems, and secrets beneath the waterfall. I asked Felicia, got her approval, then asked Steve if he would introduce us and read the foreword from the book. That's how this got started. The stories are written by residents and the authors. If you can't find one you like, consider the source. We have 2 Catholics and 1 Protestant editor. resident writers of many faiths and beliefs, including a resident raised in the Shinto religion, a pretty diverse group of writers. I'll introduce you to the chapters and then the residents reading from their stories. Chapter 1 is titled Where History Resides. Bruce Furbish and Mike Haber tells us the story of the Army residence community and how the streets were named. Tom Watson writes about the lakes of the Ark. There's a story of the Ark Chapel, as well as second-generation residents now living here. Chapter 2 is Tales of Valor, including stories from World War II and Vietnam. It has the story of Buck Taylor, Mary Lee Stuck's father, an aviation pioneer, and she'll read from that story later. Chapter 3, Where Fact Meets Fiction, contains stories based on true stories. One story is about 4 residents involved in covering up a Cold War intercept of a Russian bomber. And there's a group of Ark baseball players in Vietnam led by Joey Copey, called the Bombury Bombers. Chapter 4, Stories and Secrets Abound, includes stories about residents doing unusual things and witnessing unusual events. A diligent reader might find their name in some of these stories. Chapter 5 is artists, authors, poets, and songsters. It tells of artists of the month and others being creative. A lyrical poem in the chapter, this chapter is titled FBI Most Wanted. The resident involved thought the story humorous. However, she is no longer with us and remains anonymous. It starts like this. She's somebody's grandma with hair snowy white. FBI Most Wanted are looking for her tonight. But she's down in Argentina with maintenance man Frank. Cameras caught them robbing Ark's Broadway National Bank. A longtime resident reading the story might be able to identify Grandma. Chapter 6, The Odysseys, tells us of residents who came a long way to be here. Chapter 7, Local Legends, reveals a little of the mischievous happenings here at the Ark, including a story about 18 ladies and a bottle of wine with 19 crimes. Shared Umbrellas is filled with stories of how many of you, our residents, met their spouse. And Chapter 9, the last chapter, Echoes of Freedom, is the patriotic chapter. And that's another reason why we have this on 9/11. It contains stories of parents, brothers, and residents who were POWs in World War II and Vietnam, and concludes with a story from 9/11. We hope you will enjoy the book, and Mary Lee Stuck will read an excerpt from her father's aviation history story and add some personal touches, followed by Susan Savino reading a memoir about losing the farm, and Liz Wilson Smith will read an excerpt from her father Zero Wilson's POW story and share some memories. Aubrey McFerrin will read from a letter she wrote her son, Will, about her presence at 9/11. In the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, there's an exhibit closed off to children and those who are shielding themselves from heart-rending images. Aubrey's story is comforting. And John Murphy will conclude the reading with an experience from Vietnam found in the book and selections from his Vietnam novel, The Scarlet Shamrock. I hope you will enjoy the stories from the neighborhood. Okay, Mary Lee.
I'm Mary Lee Taylor Stuck. My grandfather, Memory Buck Taylor, owned a pool hall and a saloon in Belton, Texas. In the late 1800s, saloon owners were not known to be pillars of the community. So he made sure his wife had the finest horse and buggy in town. He married into Texas history. And Miss Rosa Lee McKay, my grandmother, Rosa's grandfather, Daniel McKay, and maternal grandfather, Benjamin Bryant, fought in Sam Houston's army at San Jacinto. He gained respect by marriage. When my father, Yantis Halbert Buck Taylor, by the way, he hated the name Yantis. The military did not have flying machines. For that matter, Wilbur and Orville Wright were still building bicycles. He was born southeast of Belton in the village of Bartlett in 1898. The same year Congress, at the urging of President McKinley, declared war on Spain. The Rough Riders were formed, the battleship Maine was blown up in Havana Harbor, and Marines landed at Guantanamo Bay. Buck's destiny was set. He was going to be in the military. Commissioned in 1922 as a second lieutenant in the Texas National Air Service, Buck was assigned to locate bootleg whiskey stills. The Mahia telegram provided him a biplane, photographed him with his plane. Printed on the photo was plane and pilot were shot at during whiskey raids, February 3rd, 1922. One little thing he told the family about that was when he'd go up before the stills had been discovered, he'd fly around and the guys that ran the stills would run out in the open and wave to them. Oh, look, somebody found us. And pretty soon here came the Texas Rangers and they put two and two together, and guess what? He couldn't fly around anymore. So released from the National Guard, he joined the Texas Rangers in 1923-24, serving in the Big Bend area to hunt bootleggers. After his whiskey adventure, Buck took advanced flying training at Kelly, graduating with a pursuit rating and a commission in the regular Army. He was assigned as a flight instructor at Kelly Field. There he became longtime friends with Lieutenant Earl E. Pat Partridge, a World War I enlisted man who served in France, was a West Point graduate in 1924, and an uncredited stunt pilot in the movie Wings. Buck also flew in the movie, recognizable as a pilot in 2 scenes. I watched it last week when Wings was on. Buck and Nita were married October 1st, 1927 in Austin, Texas. Their son, Pat Partridge Taylor, was born a year later, and he was named for his new best friend, Earl E. Pat Partridge, who later became a 4-star general. By the way, I saw this little thing and I thought I just had to share it. General Partridge and my brother, Dad had something besides their names in common. My brother Pat was born on a September 7th, and General Pat died on a September 7th. While at Kelly, Buck taught aerobatics, one time flying so close to the ground that his wing plowed a furrow in the dust. One of his students was Charles Lindbergh, who didn't do so well in aerobatics, a straight flyer. Buck set 2 flight time records. In 1925, he flew the 2,090-mile perimeter of Texas in 16 hours and 10 minutes flying time, piloting a Curtiss D-12 powered Hawk. In July 1930, he flew from Laredo, Texas to Portland, Maine in 15 hours flying time, with stops at Kelly, Muskogee, Oklahoma, St. Louis, Dayton, Ohio, Milton, PA. Destination Portland. A test to prove the Army could suddenly mobilize the Army Air Corps. Except for his eyes being bloodshot and wanting to take a nap, the test was a success. Mary Lee was born while Buck and Nita were at Kelly. Mary Lee eventually met and married Air Force pilot Lieutenant Donald H. Stuck in 1949, assigned to Buck Taylor's unit at Andrews Air Force Base. Stucco, as he was called by fellow pilots, was from White Plains, New York, and Mary Lee, at one of the social events, was captivated, but she was engaged. He had convinced her he was the better man. So Yantis Albert Taylor made his family proud. His story is in the book, Quite a Ride, Daddy.
goodness, I didn't know I was going to have to follow Mary. My goodness, what a story. My story about growing up and my connection with military life is a little different. So I guess that's why Joe chose it. Thank you, Joe. It was unusual because we didn't get to go anywhere fun. We didn't live on any bases or anything. My daddy was a Marine who fought in the Japanese islands, think the Battle of Saipan in World War II. And then he came home as quickly as he could, like they all did, and married my mom. And by the next year, I was born. So I think I was probably one of the very first baby boomers, as many of us are, right? In the first wave of boomers. My mother wouldn't leave her hometown, and her mother, Brownwood, Texas, which is not far from where your family was. So the best job Daddy could find was with the Texas National Guard, working full-time in the old armory, which was a holdover from World War II, located on what had been, in my hometown, a huge army base called Camp Bowie. It's no longer there. Does anybody here know about Camp Bowie?
Yes.
It was good. It was, we grew up, all the kids thought it was just a parking place because everywhere, all the buildings had been taken down and salvaged, but the only thing that was left was the armory, and it was still functional, and that was my daddy's job. The Army served all of Central Texas, notably Fort Hood. We lived on a small farm 7 miles out of town, and I grew up seeing my daddy go to work every day in his khakis. And unfortunately, I learned well how to wash, starch, and iron those khakis. I see other heads nodding. That was a job. But we never experienced living on any far-flung bases, and I envied the people I knew, my student friends, who had done that. Over time, Daddy worked his way up from mechanic in the belly of an old tank to the general manager of the armory. And one year, history reached out its long arm and found us. When I was 13 in rural Texas, I knew absolutely nothing about a wall going up in Berlin. I didn't know where Berlin was at that time, the Cuban Missile Crisis, or the Bay of Pigs incident. But those world events crashed into my family that year, changing everything. In the fall of 1961, Daddy's division, the Texas 49th Armored, was called to active duty. And that's when the Berlin Wall was built, as probably you all know. All we knew was that Daddy left in uniform, and we had no idea when he might return. He wasn't allowed to tell us anything, and he didn't. And we didn't know the reason he was gone until many years later. Granddaddy had always been our farm's real caretaker, and he had just died from lung cancer. So the only people left on the farm were my young mother, me, about 12 at that time, and my baby sister to run things. The Cold War had somehow reached out and taken my daddy away. On the farm, the water pump kept breaking down. The cows pushed through the barbed wire fences, and the dry Texas wind blew away all the unplowed topsoil. Suddenly, one frantic weekend, Daddy appeared home in his uniform on leave. Over the next few days, he and my mom met with the owner of a neighboring farm, an old friend of my granddaddy's. That neighbor bought our place, lock, stock, and barrel, as they say. Another neighbor bought my horses, which was my heartbreak at the time. I couldn't watch when he took them away, but I heard Molly B's high-pitched whinny as she was prodded into his horse trailer. And just like that, the next week, we drove away from the farm in the old blue Buick and settled into a rent house in town that Mom could manage until Daddy came home, which turned out to be almost a year later. The loss of the family farm, as you can tell, is still hard to talk about. What I missed most was wandering in the patch of woods next to the creek where my feet had beaten the path over the years. The loss of the farm was more than a personal loss, however. It was a shared family grief that persevered through the years. Thankfully, over time, I learned that it wasn't really lost. The memories are always part of me, always my North Star. That's where I'm from. Fast forward to the year when Anthony Sabino and I decided to make the move to the Ark, and we picked out the lot where our house would be built. It's, as you may know, it's on the very edge of the Ark land, still fringed with native mesquite, willow, and weeds. Standing in the middle of the empty lot at that day of about 10 years ago, when we picked out the lot, it reminded me suddenly of the view from my old family farmhouse. Already, this place felt like home. Even now, looking out beyond our fence at that open stretch of woods toward San Antonio, I'm reminded of my old path in the woods, and I'm thankful that we picked this spot where Texas still stretches out around us, my forever home. I wish my daddy could see the Ark, but he died at the age of 50 after a long day at his armory getting his tanks ready for inspection at Fort Hood. He never talked about that long recall that changed our lives. I didn't even know about the Texas 49th activation until a few years ago when I was writing my book and I searched through the online military records. Here's a question for you. How many of your lives were touched in some way by that the missile crisis in 1961? Oh, I saw a hand. I knew someone would be. So I never had a chance to say thank you for your service, Daddy. Sergeant First Class Jack Mooney. But I know he would be happy about where I'm living now, surrounded by all your wonderful military stories in our free United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. My name is Elizabeth Wilson Smith. I go by Liz. I live here at the Ark. Today, I'm not an author, by the way. I'm trading on someone else's information. Today, my reading centers around 3 men, 3 diaries, and 3 stories. And they all have a connection to the Ark. My brother, Joe Wilson, is here with his wife, and they're both in assisted living. My story revolves around my father, Colonel Ovid O. Wilson, affectionately referred to as Zero. I had 2 brothers, Joe, who's here, and my brother Gale. He lost his life in Vietnam on his second tour, helping save a man from dying in a helicopter accident. He was 39. Dad and my 2 brothers attended West Point, 1924, 1950, and 1953. My dad was a survivor of the Bataan Death March, 2 sinkings aboard Japanese POW hell ships, 3.5 years imprisonment in the Philippines, Japan, and Camp Mugden, Manchuria. The story he tells is not to rekindle past differences between this country and a former enemy, but a soldier's story of the horrors of war and the price a nation pays for being ill-prepared, which is a little frightening when you think about being ill-prepared the way things are going now. Prior to World War II, April 1940, Dad was stationed at Fort McKinley in the Philippines, close to Manila. We had lovely quarters there. We had Filipino help that were wonderful. They were part of our family. Our houseboy, Sergio, would bring lemonade and sandwiches to my brothers when they would come home from school. I was only 4, so I didn't get that special treatment. Life was good. My parents had a beautiful social life while they were there, and everything was great. Until, as Japan's presence in Asia became more threatening, dependents were ordered to return to the United States. That was April 1941. I feel confident that Rick Wright's father, who was also in the Philippines, was in the same camp that my father ended up being in. Rick's mother was probably on the same transport that brought my mother and my 2 brothers and me back to the States. My mother, upon our return to San Francisco, drove us from San Francisco to San Antonio to stay with my grandmother, Bessie Goodlow, who lived here in San Antonio on Howard Street. We spent the duration here, and my mother and other military wives worked downtown at the post office in the censorship office. With us safely en route to the United States, Dad's unit, along with other American forces, moved to Bataan. There in April 1942, they were ordered to surrender to Japanese forces at the town of Lemay. At that time on Corregidor, Lieutenant John M. Wright, Rick Wright's father, a resident of the Ark, was not even a dream in his father's eyes at the time. Glenn Nordine, another Ark resident who is deceased, had an older brother, Carl, serving with the Army in the Philippines. He was captured by the Japanese, held in the prison camps, interned in Japan. Both Sergeant Deneen and Lieutenant John Wright wrote books about their POW experiences. The books are here in the library. Nordine's book is We Were Next to Nothing, and Wright's book was Captured on Bataan. I've read both of them. They were like duplicates of the stories that my father tells or told. A portion of Dad's story upon surrender, April 17th. Quote, April 17th at 1 p.m., we started with 1 truck and trailer carrying our baggage, and the General's car occupied by the Chief of Staff, Colonel Steele, and the General's aide, Major Niger. The rest of us, about 100 officers and 100 enlisted, began walking. None of us were in condition for marching. Weakened by long starvation, malaria, dysentery, and no relief from our duties. We started out in terrific heat and marched to Lameo, a distance of 20 kilometers. That was the first day. Nothing untoward happened that first day, but we had no food at night except what we carried on our bodies. Leaving Lameo at 7 a.m. the next morning, we found our trailer along the trail, baggage scattered over the landscape, and the truck gone, confiscated by passing NIPS. We continued to Lemay without a Japanese guard, but on arrival, a detail of Japanese with whips, sticks, and their weapons took over our group, shook us down, and started us marching at an increased gait. Joined by increasing numbers of prisoners over the next hours, stragglers were summarily dealt with. If a person fell behind, he was beaten. If he could not catch up, he was shot. We were given water only once. The numbers vary, of course, but it is estimated 500 to 1,000 Americans and 5,000 to 18,000 Filipino soldiers perished during the more than 60-mile march itself. Many more died later in prison camps from disease, starvation, and continued abuse. Several books have been published about the hell that these men went through on the death march, in the camps, and on the hell ships, and I've read most of them. Lieutenant John Wright was kind enough to mention my dad in one of his books. He praised him as the camp entertainment officer. Colonel Wilson scoured the camp for talent. He wrote and directed shows, produced skits weekly. He managed to help the POW forget about being in prison for an hour or so each week. That was the untold side of Zero. I remember Dad telling me about some of the shows he put together. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. If you can imagine these men that are in horrible shape putting on mops as wigs like we've seen in the movie South Pacific, and trying to make the best of whatever costumes they could throw together. The Bride of Frankenstein. Another was Gone with the Wind. Dad was very creative with a great imagination. Many stories have been published about the atrocities described in many publications. They are painful to read. About 9 months after Dad returned home, he and his good friend and fellow POW, Dennis Moore, were asked to speak at a Rotary Club in Florida. Dennis Moore was actually a member of the club. I'm going to give you the first paragraph of the speech. The rest of it's in the book that Joe's put together. You got to read it. The speech starts out, "From this speaker's stand, I am sure that you have had the leading, successful, professional businessmen of your time. Experts in success from all walks of life have probably spoken to you. All the personification of how to succeed, how to win a goal. Well, you will hear no success speech today." Thank you for coming.
Those are really inspirational accounts, and I'm so glad, after knowing some of you really well, to hear these stories of bravery of your family. My son was 30 years old when he moved to New York City to go to get his MBA, and then later go to work for a accounting/finance firm on Wall Street. And this was the year of my husband Freddie's 35th wedding anniversary. His 35th reunion at West Point. And so I went up a few days ahead of time. William had just moved into a new apartment in Battery Park City, which is located just about a block and a half south of the Twin Towers and a block east from the Hudson River. It was a very nice area, and I remember the first couple of days I was there, how safe I felt in New York. And the young families I watched as they were playing in the various play areas along the river with their parents watching, and it just wasn't what I thought New York City would be like. Giuliani was the mayor at that time, and I don't know, I guess he had something to do with it feeling safe there. But on September 11th, William had gone to work. He'd only been working for about a week, and this was a beautiful, beautiful day. And I had gone partially to help him get settled in his new apartment, So I was looking for a hardware store where I could just buy a hammer and some nails to hang some pictures for him. So I looked in the telephone book and found that there was one across a wide street that separated the Twin Towers from the World Financial Center. The World Financial Center was on the same side of across from the Twin Towers that were close to where William's apartment was. So I walked in there and there wasn't anybody out in the hallways, which I thought was strange, but it was about 8:50, I guess, and I think a lot of people were already in their offices. So I saw a security guard and I asked him if he knew where this street was that I was looking for, and he said, oh yeah, all you have to do is take the pedestrian bridge across to the South Tower, and you'll go down the escalator and then walk a block south. So I did that, and as I was coming down the escalator, in the enclosed pedestrian bridge, it was all enclosed, it was glassed in, suddenly there was a huge explosion, and the glass started shattering, and I wasn't sure what had happened. When you are going down an escalator, you are normally looking down. Had I been looking up, I would have seen the plane, the first plane, fly into the North Tower. And it's amazing how adrenaline takes over. And I felt really calm, but I saw there was a young man who was leaning against the wall of the elevator about 10 steps in front of me, and beyond him I could just hear the loud cries of a woman. So I walked the 10 steps down and I kind of leaned against him, and then he suddenly said, I'm out of here because I think this is going to fill up with poisonous gas. So I started running back up the escalator and slowed to a walk, and I became aware that I was not really afraid, that I was calm, didn't really know what had happened, but I just said a silent prayer, thanking God that I wasn't afraid. Walked back to William's apartment, and when I walked in, the telephone was ringing. And I answered it. It was my husband, who's sitting right there, and he was at Forcecom headquarters in Atlanta. And he already knew, this hadn't been more than 15 minutes, if that. He already knew that we thought it was an accident. And while we were sitting there on the phone, me being a block and a half away from the towers, he being in Atlanta, William's television, my son's television, was on, and he was watching TV where he was, and we both witnessed the second plane hit the North Tower. And of course we knew then that we were under attack. So I began to, I said, okay, I've got to go, I've got to find William, try to find William. I didn't have his phone number, he had just started there. I looked up in the telephone book the name of the company. Of course the phone rang and rang and rang, no answer. And about 15 minutes after that, he burst in the door. Of course, he hadn't been able to get a hold of me, and he was worried that his dad would kill him if he didn't find his mother. So we were very relieved to be back together. And he said, Mom, I'm gonna, because his windows in his apartment building faced south, and the towers were on the other north side of the building. So we couldn't see anything going on. And he wanted to go down and just look back and kind of see what was happening. And so I said, okay, I'll come with you. So I grabbed my sunglasses. He had made a quick change of clothes. It was really a beautiful day. It was cool, but real sunny. And so we went down and we got outside and looked back, and suddenly the South Tower, which was the second one, I think I had gotten that wrong a minute ago when I was talking. The South Tower was the second tower to be hit, and it collapsed first, right in front of our eyes. It started falling. And he grabbed my hand, we went back inside the building, and the lobby of his apartment building was being renovated. So the front door was open and the door on the back of the building was open, allowing all of the soot and dust that was gathering on the streets to blow inside. So we could not see. I knew he was holding my hand, but I couldn't see him. And he said, okay, I'm going to lead us out. So I followed him out. There was somebody behind me holding my hand. To this day, I don't know who it was. But it was a lady. And then, so when we got outside, I could tell we were outside because there was a bush right in front of my face. And then when I said, I think we need to walk over to the river. And he said, well, as soon as things clear, we will. And as things cleared, the thought that came to my mind was that it just looked like a war zone already at that point. So we walked the block over to where we could walk alongside the walkway of the river and start walking south. And as we did that, then the North Tower collapsed. And we were far enough away that we didn't have to run. But what really amazed me was how quick the EMS, emergency services, responded. Because as we were walking down to the end of Manhattan Island, there were EMTs handing out bottled water and face masks. And we got all the way down to the end, and we could see from a distance tugboats coming in, headed, towards where we were. Hundreds of them. It was incredible how fast the response was. It was probably took us longer to walk down there than how I'm telling it, but it really was remarkable. You can tell, I think it had only been about 3 years before that, where there had been an accidental smaller plane that had crashed into the Twin Towers. So they were prepared for something like this to happen. And so we waited there for probably 2 hours and then got on one of the tugboats. It took us across to Liberty Island, and as we approached that island, you could see fire trucks out there. And they had set up just these outdoor kind of shower things. And as people came off the tugboats, they directed you over there for you to stand under these makeshift showers and just try to wash as much of that off of you as they could. Of course, you were completely clothed. They had big towels to wrap around you. It was really incredible. Then we just sat outside in the sun there for maybe 2 hours, and then buses started coming. And they told everybody to get on the bus, get on the bus, get on the bus. So we got on the bus, and they took us, there were probably, several hundred people. They took to a National Guard armory. And when we got to the armory, after we'd been there a little while, they brought in food, bag lunches for everyone. We were there for several hours. And then they told us they had the buses still there, and they said, if you want to go to the train going south, get on this bus, et cetera, et cetera. So I had a nephew who lived in New Jersey that we had been able to call and say, we're going to be coming on the train. And we were able to tell him what stop where we would be. And so we went, and sure enough, they were there waiting for us. So my husband was not able to come up for the reunion, but my nephew drove me up to West Point a couple of days later, so I was able, had no clothes, of course. I bought a little something at Walmart, I think. But I think the main thing that I wanted to say was the peace that I had through the whole thing, and how grateful I was that to have my son watching over me, and then to be able to talk to my husband and other family members that night. We were very blessed, very fortunate, and every year when we see the stories of the rescues and what was done to help people, it's really remarkable. And I had the opportunity to go back several times as they were doing the renovation and to walk around the peripheral of the whole area that they had blocked off and see all of the dolls and the teddy bears and the pictures and notes that people had left for their loved ones. Was very emotional. But it was a time when our country really came together, and it's just a day I'll never forget. So thank you for asking me to share that.
In 1954, the French gave way at a place called Dien Bien Phu. 1954. Fast forward, spring of 1966, along what the French used to refer to as the Rue Saint-Joie, the street without joy, we were operating. And I went into a small hamlet, and I remember going into this decrepit little abode, and there was an old lady in there, and she had this dwarf-sized bed and a pot of rice, and that was about all she had. And she got very animated and very upset when she saw me. And I had a Vietnamese interpreter with me, and he talked to her for a minute, and the interpreter said, "Dawi, she thinks you're going to take her rice." And I said, "No, tell her we're just going to be here a short while, not to worry." So she got a toothless smile on her face, and they bantered back and forth for a minute. And then the interpreter turned to me, and again, this is 1966. The interpreter turned to me and said, "Dawi, she thinks you're a legionnaire." She thought I was a French legionnaire. We were operating along, again, the Rue Saint-Joie, and I wrote this little piece that is in our book that's going to be published. Sometimes insignificant happenings stick in your mind. One such resurrected itself in mine as I read about the sufferings of the people in the Ukraine. In the spring of 1966, while serving in Vietnam, my company was operating south of a city called Tam Kỳ along Route 1. The French legionnaires called it the Rue Saint-Joie, or Street Without Joy. We stopped at a small hamlet for a break, and while there, the locals came out to interact. One young mother held her 2-year-old son. She sought help as he had a terrible infection or growth at the base of his skull, about the size of a lemon. My corpsman could do nothing to help her. We had a vehicle with us, so I told my men to load the two of them on the bed of the truck and for the corpsman to take the mother and child to the collecting and clearing company near our base camp. The collecting and clearing company stabilized wounded Marines for further transfer to one of the hospital ships or to the Naval Hospital on Guam. They had an impressive staff, a thoracic surgeon, a general surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon, and an anesthesiologist. When we loaded the two onto the truck, they lifted the 2-year-old up first. Barefooted, he immediately began to cry as the hot steel on the bed of the truck burned his tiny feet. We hoisted his mother up, and she quickly remedied the situation. Then off they went. I didn't know if the doctors would handle the case, but I hoped for the best. Later, when we returned to our base camp, I had occasion to go by the collecting and clearing company, so I stopped by just to see if they had helped the young charge we had sent their way. The setup was primitive by civilian standards, tents and cots, but that was all right. And to my delight, I saw the mother and her young son. The doctors had operated on him and probably saved his life. The two of them were doing well and would soon return to their hamlet. During times of trial, sometimes good things happen. After my second tour in Nam, I came back somewhat disillusioned. I didn't say much to anybody, but I harbored some ill feelings. When I eventually retired from the Marine Corps, I went to work for an organization, and one of the superiors in the organization was a draft dodger and was very proud of the fact that he was a draft dodger, and went on to make pejorative comments about anybody that had served in the military. This kind of ate away at me, and I, rather than talk with people, I decided I'd maybe write a book and express some of my feelings and reflect on some incidents that I knew about and otherwise was able to create. The book itself is, let me just quickly cite a little lead in so you'll have an idea where I'm coming from when I read of some of the passages. In the turmoil of the 1960s, two strikingly different countries, Ireland and Vietnam, each shared a common conviction: the unification of its country and the expulsion of foreign aggressors. One man, Ned O'Shea, lands in the very heart of all this darkness. The Scarlet Shamrock is the debut military thriller by John Murphy that charts the perilous journey of a soldier caught up in the brutal throes of two wars. Fierce loyalties clash and betrayals lurk around every patch of land. Fast-paced and richly evocative of a turbulent time in world history, this absorbing story charts two legendary conflicts through the lens of one relentless warrior. At the height of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, the IRA operative Ned O'Shea will stop at nothing to banish the British from his beloved Irish soil. When a traitor to the cause reveals Ned's involvement with a plot to assassinate an English official, the Irish patriot is forced to flee his homeland. He slips away aboard a Polish freighter bound for Boston. There he assumes a false identity and joins the United States Marine Corps, which leads him to another savage conflict in Vietnam. The Scarlet Shamrock offers a vivid and arresting look at a world in chaos and one man's rigorous resolve to honor both his native land and his newly ingrained Marine commitment. With that as sort of a lead-in, a background, this Ned O'Shea character is killed, and the draft dodger, he assumed the role of a draft dodger. The draft dodger is still alive, and a Marine casualty assistance officer goes and makes a casualty call on the family to tell them that their son had died, where in effect their son had not died, just the draft dodger was there. This was the casualty assistance officer at the home. Passing through the foyer, he saw the living room to the left, and a woman sitting in the center of a long green sofa. The walls were red, with a black 3-inch carving design at the top. 3 other chairs were in the room, one being a large leather recliner in which the ill-mannered man of the house immediately flopped. That was the draft dodger. "Are you Mrs. Kagan?" asked Lieutenant Thompson, still standing at the entrance to the living room. "Yes, I am," she answered. The woman appeared mummified. Her long gray hair hung uncombed about her face and shoulders, and she wore no makeup on her pasty skin. Her nondescript dress was disheveled and frayed, but her mouth caught the lieutenant's attention. Its oval structure reminded him of a lamprey and made her look like some grotesque bit player in a Hollywood B movie. Mrs. Kagan had nylons on too, but they had runs in them and were baggy. She neither invited the lieutenant to sit down nor displayed any interest in his presence. He thought by her odd and unexpressive presence that she might be mentally unbalanced. He wanted to be anywhere but where he was. "May I sit down, Mrs. Kagan?" he said in a firm voice, sensing that his anger might still be obvious. Sit in that chair, came the mechanistic answer as the woman pointed to a straight-back chair close to where the officer stood. Wanting to waste no time in what appeared to be an unreal situation, Lieutenant Thompson came right to the point. Mrs. Kagan, I'm afraid I have some bad news. Your son Thomas was killed in the Republic of Vietnam day before yesterday. His platoon was overrun by enemy forces and died in the ensuing fight. Please accept the condolences of the United States government and the Marine Corps at your great loss. I wish there was an easier way to break the sad news, but there isn't. Is there anything I can do for you at this time? Contact a neighbor, a priest, or maybe a friend? Shit, man, fuck! The young man in the recliner blurted out, throwing his arms in the air in apparent frustration. This fucking complicates everything. Shut up, son, Mrs. Kagan said in an emotionless tone. She turned to Lieutenant Thompson and advised him to disregard her son's outburst. She then turned back to her son and told him to leave the room. He stormed out, going directly to the rear of the house and out the back door, slamming it loudly. His mother continued, goes on about how he and his so-called brother didn't get along. Speechless, Lieutenant Thompson looked open-mouthed at the woman on the couch before him. He thought he'd seen everything, but this had to be the utmost in absurdity. All he could think about was getting out of the house as quickly as possible, so he advised the stoic woman that he would return the next day and go over funeral plans and other administrative details. I don't want you to come back tomorrow or any time. We will conduct any further discussion on the telephone. I told you I had prepared myself for this moment, so I can give you some immediate direction. First, there would be no funeral in the greater Boston area. I want Thomas buried in the punch bowl of the National Military Cemetery in Hawaii. Secondly, I want nothing given to the media about Thomas's death. I will deal with friends and relatives my own way. And lastly, how much do I get? When I was the adjutant of the 9th Marine Corps District, I got a call from a casualty assistance call. It was on a Monday morning, and I had given him the call on a Friday afternoon. And he said, don't give me another one of those. I said, why, what happened? He said, I spent the whole weekend trying to find this guy's wife. I found her shacked up with somebody. And when I told her her husband had been killed, her first thing she said was, how much do I get? So I incorporated that into the book. I beg your pardon, ma'am, Lieutenant asked in disbelief. There must be some kind of insurance a government pays when a soldier is killed, she tastelessly responded. Mrs. Kagan, there is a death gratuity of $50,000 paid to those designated by the deceased. In the case of your son Thomas, he elected to have the Red Cross receive the full amount. Why did he not designate you as a beneficiary? I do not know. We can only act on what is contained in the official records. The woman on the couch showed the first signs of any emotion at the lieutenant's response. Slowly, her face grew taut. Her body stiffened and her lips parted in an odd manner, displaying the longest teeth Lieutenant Thompson ever seen in a human face. She glared at him and appeared as though she might lunge off the sofa and assault him. Clenching her fists, she made a guttural grunt that sounded like it came from some possessed creature. Finally, she spoke. Her phlegm-filled words appalling the already startled Marine. Get out of my house, you sorry bastard. Leave now. Lieutenant Thompson quickly rose from his chair and without looking back, walked directly to the front door and left the house. He struggled down the front steps and reached the car. He leaned against it and threw up. If we got just a minute, I'll finish with what I had in the epilogue of the book. It's a scene where there's a reunion of this Marine regiment. And when it was over with, the next day, they laid a wreath at the Marine Memorial, rather at the Vietnam Memorial in Washington. And after everybody had left, there were two officers that remained, and I'll just quickly finish up with the ending. Two Marines remained, Jason Davis. By the way, can you hear me all right back there? Jason Davis and Jim Flaherty. Jason sat on a bench facing the memorial. Jim slowly walked the wall, searching for a name. Finally, he questioned the National Park Service ranger. The ranger looked at a dog-eared list and shook his head. Perplexed, Jim started to walk away from the wall when Jason Davis called to him. "You won't find his name up there, Jim." Startled, he turned to Jason and sheepishly asked, "Whose name?" "Lieutenant Kagan's," came Jason's mellow response. "How did you know I was looking for his name?" "Because you knew him better than I did, and he died on your watch. My barracks handled the casualty call. I knew him from my Vietnam tour right before I went to Boston. His name wasn't Kagan. He assumed it, took it from a draft dodger. The real Kagan dodged the draft. The Kagan we knew was an Irish national by the name of Ned O'Shea." Jim Flaherty, his mouth transfixed, slowly sat on the bench next to him, next to Jason Davis, and stated, "You won't find Ned O'Shea's name up there either." Anyway, he goes on that the State Department said it wouldn't be appropriate for an IRA operative's name to be up there. Ned was an orphan. The Irish said he had no relatives, and to the best of my knowledge, history will leave Ned buried unknown in the punch bowl. He's a forgotten man, and it's too bad because he was quite a man. The two sat in silence before the wall, awash in a kaleidoscope of memories like waves at the seashore, one after the other. Jason Davis broke the silence. "Jim, some years ago, I worked at the Pentagon. We lived in Old Town Alexandria. Every day on my way to work and from work, I drove by a Confederate memorial in the middle of the town. It consisted of a Confederate soldier facing south and atop a granite base. Whoever sculpted it did a superb job because the figure cast a melancholy presence. One day I parked and went over and looked at the inscription at the base. It read, "They served in the consciousness of duty faithfully performed." Somehow, Jim, that epithet sounds appropriate for the memorial too. Faraday said nothing. He continued looking straight ahead, trying to reconcile in his mind what had happened to Ned O'Shea. In the silence, a middle-aged couple and an older gentleman approached the monument cautiously and reverently. The younger man wore black shoes with rounded toes, dark trousers, and a blue striped shirt open at the neck, and a brown suit coat with wide lapels, and a maroon cap bearing the logo of a farm implement dealer. The woman held the front collar of her faded blue coat up under her chin to ward off the dampness of the chilly fog. Springs of premature gray hair peeked out from beneath her headscarf. A well-worn black handbag hung from her left shoulder. She glanced back repeatedly, seeming to encourage the elderly man a half dozen paces behind them. His steps were labored. He had on a frayed brown suit, and a dark felt hat covered his head. A skinny necktie, typical of the 50s, was askew at his throat. He carried something wrapped in green tissue paper in his right hand. A park ranger approached and touched the brim of his hat as he greeted them. They waited patiently as the ranger turned the pages on his clipboard. He smiled, pointed to the tree on his right, and continued down the memorial's pathway. The man took the woman's arm and guided her in the direction of the ranger's gesture. The elderly man followed in measured steps, his eyes scanning the neatly chiseled names. Davis and Flaherty watched them, and then heard the other man, the older man, say, "Here it is." The man and the woman moved quickly back to the spot where the old man pointed. At that moment, the husband and the wife surrendered their composure. She fell sobbing against the black granite, her hand clutching, patting the name they sought. The older man dabbed his eyes with a handkerchief as he tried to console them. "They found their boy," David said softly, almost rhetorically. Flaherty nodded. After several minutes, the couple unfolded some rubbing paper and traced their son's name on it. The mother folded the paper as though she had just been given an altar cloth and carefully placed it inside her handbag. She took the green tissue paper wrap cone from her father and then the man in the brown suit and unwrapped a single rose. Her husband removed a small roll of masking tape from his trouser pocket and taped the rose to their son's name. The three locked arms as they stood there. Silently, they walked away, arm in arm, disappearing into the fog. Without a word, Davis and Flaherty got up and followed them. That's all.